So Apple decided to integrate the mouse into their inventory, and kind of make it really, it's a lot easier to use than simply typing, learning all of these keys, you know, pressing 5 keys at the same time to get the machine to do something. And after a couple of years, Apple came out with a machine called the Lisa. I think it was named Lisa because I think that was the name of his girlfriend at the time. The Lisa was a lousy machine. It was very expensive and it underperformed. It was just simply not very good at all. And this was a tremendous sore for Apple. I mean, they had invented the personal computer. The 2E was all over the place. And their next generation, the Lisa, was tremendously a flop. It just was. It just didn't go anyplace at all, and it looked like IBM, which was developing what we now know as the PC, was going to be the name of the game for the personal computers. I remember around this time, Santa Clara, made its first big investment in computers, and we at Santa Clara got PCs, and I know Elena Danielson's husband Ron was very much. I don't think he was involved in that decision, but when Ron became kind of the technology person, he went back over the budgets and he laughed to find out that Santa Clara had actually bought all of these PCs. I don't know how much it cost, but it was a huge amount of money. And everything that Santa Clara spent on PCs was on purchasing. The maintenance and operations budget was zero. And Ron still, can't believe that anybody would have been so silly, but Santa Clara was that silly. In any event, the Lisa looked like it was, a flop, and it looked like PC was going to take over, and Apple really kind of hunkered down. Now this is 1983. I think the Lisa came out 82 or 83, and so Apple kind of hunkered down. What's it going to do? Well, the answer came actually in the Super Bowl of all places. The end of 1983 season, the Super Bowl was being held between the Raiders. It was January '84. The Super Bowl was held between the Raiders and the Washington Redskins. And I don't know whether the Raiders were in Oakland at that time or whether they were in Los Angeles. But that Super Bowl is well known for having featured one of what everybody still regards as probably the greatest run in Super Bowl history. I'm going to take off my earplugs here.
That's a good memory. On came Marcus Allen, running with the knife. To make a run like that in a game like that at a time like that was pure magic. It was beautiful.
Plunkett giving to Allen, setting a wide left. He has to reverse his field, but he gets away for a moment. Comes back up to the 30, 35, 40. Runs past 2 men at the 50, down to the 40, picking up a blocker. Oh, Toledo! Touchdown Raiders! 7-4.
As I said, that's regarded as the greatest run in Super Bowl history when he reversed his field. And of course, the first announcer was the television announcer, was the NFL announcer, but the second announcer was Bill King, who was the play-by-play announcer for years for the Raiders. In any other year, that would have been what is most remembered about that Super Bowl. But this was not the case for this year, because during halftime, viewers who kind of stayed and watched saw kind of something that they didn't really expect to see.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
That ad, of course, started the tradition of Super Bowl ads being just sort of something that you want to watch more than the Super Bowl itself. But that ad was probably one of the most famous Super Bowl ads ever. And in fact, the introduction of the Macintosh the next year did in fact resurrect Apple's fortunes. The Mac was still much more expensive than the PC, but it created a kind of a buzz, so that from that time forward, you had people who only used Apples and other people who only used PCs, and it was kind of like a divide, a chasm which would never be would never be crossed. But it was just the most famous Super Bowl ad in history, and Apple's resurrection from the Lisa fiasco. Next year, the very next year, Apple, since you've got something that goes really well, let's see if we can do it again. And so they came out with another Super Bowl ad, which is widely regarded as disastrous as the first ad in '84 had been wonderful. It was an ad, basically, it was called the Lemmings ad. And it basically had a bunch of very buttoned down type of people, carrying briefcases like very good office workers, following each other, and eventually they kind of walk off of a cliff. It was widely regarded as one of the worst Super Bowl ads ever. But for Apple, actually, it didn't really matter all that much, because they had already done something, using their marketing skills. They had already done something. They had been invited. This particular Super Bowl was at Stanford Stadium. And so a number of Bay Area companies were invited by the NFL to be hosts, to be sponsors of the Super Bowl. And the question was, Art, how do you want to do that sponsorship? And Apple figured, okay, this is a great time for us to get our name out there. And so they sent a couple of young marketing people to the Stanford Stadium to see what they could do. Their first thought was, okay, well, it's January, and January in the Bay Area can be chilly and cold. So maybe we can do blankets. Maybe we can give everybody a blanket as they come in with the Apple logo on it. And if we can get it right, then as they're covering themselves, the television cameras will pan out, and everybody will see the Apple logo on that. But when the two marketing people, neither of whom was football fans, got there, they'd never been to the Stanford Stadium before. The Stanford Stadium, was like, just benches. There's no backs to the chairs or anything like that. It's just an old-fashioned football stadium. And so they said, this is going to be pretty uncomfortable if people are supposed to be sitting here for hours. And so they came up with the idea of on each seat of the Stanford Stadium, they would have an Apple seat cushion. And so that's what they did. They covered each seat with a seat cushion that had the Apple logo on it. And, they figured this is absolutely great. And it wasn't until one of these two marketing people kind of saw the seat cushions being put down that she realized, oh my gosh, there is a huge, huge problem. Because at the Stanford Stadium, the number of the seat is right there on the bench. And if you put a seat cushion on top of it, you're not going to have, who knows, because everybody will come into the stadium with the number on their ticket, and you've covered up, 85,000 numbers in the stadium. So what are you going to do? And so this person, panicking, they had major conferences and everything like that, and finally they called 3M. And explained the situation, and what 3M did, basically in record time, literally, a couple of days before the Super Bowl was to happen, 3M made little things like that for them, and so they went around and put each of these on all of the seat covers, and then the marketing person, whom I know, who's a friend of mine. She's retired from Apple now. She said she got up at like 4 o'clock in the morning after having not slept at all that night, having nightmares. And she got to the stadium about 5 o'clock in the morning and just did, spent hours doing random checks to make sure that that these numbers were actually on the right seat. So actually, when people when they got to the stadium, they saw that, and Apple got a tremendous amount of publicity out of that. Well,